our piece of Edwards chert. The cortex on one side is really chalky, but it actually flakes okay. On the other side we have a little bit of the interior, so I'm going to work this cortex off and see if we can get into the good stuff. So let's set up a platform. I want to take it from here across. So it means I need to set up my platform on the opposite side and then take it in. It's our beveled platform. I'm just going to use the antler to scrape it a little bit, get some of that chatter off. Alright, let's give it a hit. Take it from here across. Nope, crushed it. Alright. Set one up from here, we'll go across here. Okay. 1, 2. Alright, strengthen that platform up, get that chatter off. Alright, here we go. From here to here. Yep. There we go. Since we want to save the interior, the gray part, and we want to get rid of the white chalky part, and we have the cortex on this side, I'm going to bevel it going towards the good side, and then I'll remove flakes against the bad side. This doesn't have to look pretty. What you need to do is get a nice working edge. So I'm hitting this at about a 45-degree angle with the edge of my billet, and I'm working in a nice beveled edge along this side. This will give me a working surface from which to take flakes off. So this is a relatively steep angle, about 45 degrees, that I'm working this beveled edge into. From there I'll decrease the angle and take longer flake. Okay. So I followed that ridge and it took off all the part we needed, nothing we didn't. Alright. We want to come in from this margin and take it towards the base. That way I don't have to keep hitting it across. I might end up having to, but what I want to try to do is take it at this angle from here to here. 1, good, 2. That's what we needed. Here's what's left of that oblique flake. Oblique meaning that is coming at an angle to midline. Straight midline flake would be coming straight across, and this one took off what we needed at slide angle. Before we move on to the finished point, what I've done is I've split up our debitage that I created into primary, secondary, and tertiary. This is what typically we use, or many archaeologists use in the field, to infer different stages of reduction. This being primary at the quarry, secondary some distance from it, and then a final shaping elsewhere. And this doesn't always work out well. In this case, I've grouped them, but just on looks, and not actually on how they were produced or when. The problem with this is that we go into a site and we see a bunch of these flakes and we think that we're at a quarry site, or we see a bunch of these flakes, we think that we're far from the quarry, when in fact all of these were made intermingled. What's actually a little bit more realistic for what we did here, instead of grouping it into primary through tertiary, is here's actually the pattern that I created when I was creating this biface. We have a couple setup flakes over here. These are the first ones removed, so there's only a little bit of cortex on there, just because of the place I chose to remove them from. Those set up a larger flake that does have cortex, which sets up a bigger flake that's fully corticated. And then I took 2, one of which has very little cortex, one has 50%. From that allowed me to move a fully cortical piece. The next 2 barely have any cortex at all. Then I took 2 with 50% cortex. The next 2 had none. 1 out of 3 had cortex for the second stage. And then from here, things still have cortex, all the way down into tertiary looking flakes. So they're all created intermingledly. And if we look at the debitage from trimming flakes created through that, That's all what we would consider retouch flakes. But those were the setup flakes for the larger, fully cortical flakes. So let's just remember, when we're in the field, that just because we see something's fully cortical, or something that looks like a retouch chip because it doesn't have any cortex on it, it's really actually kind of hard to infer stages of production. Okay, so after a few more flake passes, here's the unnotched preform. This is its final stage as far as I'm concerned. About as long as a pinky. If you see, I'm only supporting it lightly with my finger here. I'm not cramming into it. I've got a little, the tip is in the pocket of my palm here, so I'm not putting any pressure on that. I'm being really light with it at this point. All my fingers are doing is to stabilize it. They're not pushing, they're just stabilizing. And just all it's doing is just barely holding it. Here's our finished dart point on the Edwards chert. Got a little concave base and also our side notches. I chose not to put the notches too deep, and that keeps some strength on the hafting element. If you start throwing those notches in too deep, then you're just going to get a snap base, plain and simple. They look really pretty when they're super deep, but not always that functional. I chose to keep it relatively thick. That'll make sure that it doesn't snap on the first try, hopefully. And also the thickness helps it carry some weight as far as the dart tip. Well, I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see how this functions on the next test.